So, there's this couple, me and my wife Jennifer. We've been together since high school, about 9 years now. We were seen as the perfect couple, but we had different dreams. I wanted to be a lawyer, and Jennifer aimed to be a Hollywood actress. I graduated before her and went to an out-of-state law school, starting a long-distance relationship. Jennifer then dropped a bombshell. She wanted to study acting in Europe. Despite the challenges, we stuck it out, with me working hard in law and her chasing her acting dreams. Eventually, I landed a job at a law firm, but things went south when the CEO got involved in a scandal. I lost my job, and we faced the risk of losing our house due to accumulated debt. When I told my wife about losing my job, we cried and tried to figure out how to stay financially stable. We thought about selling our stuff or her getting a part-time job, even flipping burgers. But these ideas weren't enough. Just before our mortgage deadline, she surprised me with news of a major TV contract. She kept the details secret, which seemed odd, but I didn't press. Things got better, and I got a new job at a smaller law firm. My wife's acting career flourished, but she kept things private. I started feeling suspicious, but I ignored it. Meanwhile, we both worked on personal development. However, our intimacy faded, and her glamorous appearance puzzled me. The plot thickened when an anonymous person sent me photos suggesting she was involved in questionable activities. Initially, I thought it was a mistake or prank, but no one clarified, and my concerns grew. Realizing I needed to dig deeper into the situation, I decided to use some money I had saved from previous pro bono work to hire a private investigator. I didn't want to engage in activities like lurking around strip clubs, and if my suspicions were wrong, I didn't want to unnecessarily distress my wife. Though the private investigator's services were costly, he proved diligent. He traced the source of the photos and provided a detailed report with high-resolution images, leaving no room for doubt. The shocking discovery hit me hard. My wife Jennifer, my partner of 9 years, was involved in a high-end private couples club. Feeling blindsided and betrayed, I sat in the living room that night, waiting for her return. When she arrived, surprised to find me awake, I asked her directly about her involvement in the private club. Despite her initial denial, I presented the damning evidence, and her demeanor changed. Instead of more lies, she broke down in tears, claiming it was all to save our home and apologizing for her actions. However, her apology felt insufficient, and I pointed out that her fear of disappointing me didn't justify betraying our trust. I questioned why she didn't share her struggles earlier, especially when I had secured a new job a few months ago. She seemed at a loss for words, and the situation became increasingly complex. I didn't need to hear more. Suddenly, everything fell into place. The designer labels on the coat racks, the expensive decor in our home, her numerous expensive clothes. How could I have been so blind? The realization hit me hard. Jennifer was no longer the humble actress. She had become a highly paid symbol of sensuality. One last question lingered. Did she enjoy it? The money, the fame, all of it. She remained silent, and the silence felt like an endless chasm. Finally, she asked what I wanted her to do. Did I want her to quit? At that moment, I was fighting back tears, unsure of how to trust her. We stood there in silence, like two statues in a crumbling monument of marriage, hoping for a miracle. Then she broke the silence, pleading for a second chance and promising to quit the next day. I wished I could have remained cold and kicked her out. It would have been the right thing to do. I came close to doing it, but I couldn't bring myself to say the word divorce. Our lives were too intertwined. Reluctantly, I agreed, deciding to give her a second chance. Despite her objections, I accompanied her to the club the next day to verify that she was truly quitting. There, I witnessed my wife confronting her boss, and my fists clenched as I saw his smug expression. After this emotionally draining experience, my life felt like a cheesy joke. We left the place together, and I decided to take a week off from work to reconnect with my wife. We tried to relive our teenage days, reminiscing about sweet moments, playful pranks, and laughter. It felt nostalgic, and for a brief moment, I genuinely believed we could mend our relationship. Surprisingly, my wife's former job at the private couples club had actually saved our house. It was tough for me to accept, given my role as the primary breadwinner. Nevertheless, she quit right in front of me, and we had more time to spend together. Another week passed, and she began applying for new jobs. Around the same time, our law firm assigned me to handle a $1 million lawsuit in Indiana. The prospect of going long distance again made me anxious, but my wife's reassurances gave me the courage to accept the job. At the airport, we bid each other a passionate farewell, filled with promises, hugs, and kisses. As I departed, a mix of excitement for my new role and anxiety about trusting Jennifer once more overwhelmed me. I chose to trust her, even though some might judge me for it. Just when things were starting to improve, Murphy's Law struck once more, determined to test me further. My weakness had been exposed, revealing that I wasn't yet prepared to be strong. My life took an unexpected turn as a result. The initial weeks of my new job showed promise, defending troubled teenagers on the verge of juvenile detention, fulfilling work I'd been searching for. Despite my busy schedule, I made it a point to call my wife every evening. However, after a few weeks, I noticed a change. There were times when she wasn't available, or she didn't answer my calls. She had her explanations, like job hunting and errands, which I accepted without question. Then, one day at work, I received a mysterious text message from the anonymous person who had originally alerted me to Jennifer's secret life. The message stirred up a familiar sense of unease, and my heart began to race once more. I promptly responded and arranged a meeting at a local restaurant for the following Tuesday. The week leading up to the meeting felt like an eternity, but Tuesday eventually arrived. I wrapped up work by 5:00 p.m. and headed to the restaurant. Arriving a bit early, I ordered the first thing on the menu and settled into my seat. To be honest, I wasn't really interested in the food. My entire focus was on the mysterious guest who was about to disrupt my life once again. Around 6:00 p.m., an elegant woman entered the restaurant, and somehow, I instinctively knew she was the person I had been expecting. As she approached my table, she introduced herself, saying, "I'm Nancy, and you must be Jessica's husband, right?" I replied affirmatively, my interest piqued. She then revealed how she came into possession of those pictures. Letting out a heavy sigh, Nancy explained that we both worked at the same club, but she quit last week. She paused, scrutinizing me carefully before continuing, "I should have spoken up earlier, but I was afraid of losing my job. Now that I've left that terrible place, I believe it's time for you to hear the whole story." A whirlwind of emotions overtook me. Anxiety, anticipation, doubt. What was I about to discover about my wife? "Please continue," I urged, leaning forward with eagerness. Nancy exhaled and began sharing her story. Jessica and she were colleagues, sharing the same work schedule and often taking breaks together. Nancy had been there for 3 years before Jessica arrived, helping her settle in completely unaware that she was concealing her marital status. Whenever Nancy asked if this job was truly what Jessica wanted, she confidently answered yes, and Nancy took her at her word. Initially, Jessica would clock out promptly after her shift and head straight home, but over time, Nancy noticed changes. Jessica started spending more time with customers and staff. The club attracted many actors, and Jessica seemed to connect particularly well with them. She also began arriving at work in increasingly extravagant outfits. While this wasn't unusual for the job, Jessica was taking it to the next level. Nancy went on to recount how one night Jessica invited her to a nightclub after their shift, and they both ended up quite intoxicated, although Nancy drank less as she had work the next morning, taking responsibility for Jessica's condition. Nancy arranged for an Uber to ensure she got home safely. On our way back, Jessica inquired about why I worked at the club. I shared the honest truth, my pressing need for money and my unsuccessful attempts to secure employment elsewhere. When I posed the same question to her, she initially claimed it was to cover her mortgage. However, she later confessed that she continued working there because she enjoyed the luxurious lifestyle the job provided. Then Nancy dropped a colossal bombshell, surpassing all the revelations before. In her intoxicated state, Jessica slipped up and mentioned that I sounded like her husband. I was horrified. Nancy explained that she took covert photos to alert me. Using social media, she identified my workplace, placed the envelope in my cubicle, and hoped for the best. I was left in shock, replaying the night when I had confronted my wife. She began for us but continued for herself. I had accused her, and my gut instincts had been correct. I regretted not trusting them, regretted acting weak and gullible throughout this ordeal. Noticing my silence, Nancy patiently waited for my response. I expressed gratitude for her candor and disclosed my decision to initiate divorce proceedings. With that, Nancy exited the restaurant and my life. Yet something still felt unsettling as I prepared to file for divorce. A startling letter arrived, adding yet another blow. The hits just kept coming. Jessica had beaten me to the punch, leveling allegations of misuse, mistreatment, and even infidelity against me. The outlandish claims were accompanied by a photo of Nancy and me at the restaurant. The realization hit me. Jessica had been monitoring my activities. Despite being overwhelmed by anger and anxiety, I recognized the need to maintain composure. Despite the damning evidence and my wife's public defamation on social media, I knew these accusations were unfounded. My first step was to rehire the same private investigator, armed with a wealth of evidence against my deceptive wife. I was prepared to mount a defense. Although Jessica had initiated the first strike against me, I was resolute in my determination to make her rue the day. I gathered all the information obtained by the private investigator and created backups on my phone and computer. Subsequently, I reached out to Nancy, inquiring if she would be willing to testify on my behalf during the divorce hearing. My wife had taken a screenshot of our conversation and was accusing me of infidelity and more. Nancy's response came after a full day. "Yes, just let me know when," I replied, informing her that the hearing was scheduled for the following month. I spent the night meticulously organizing all the evidence and mentally preparing myself for the ultimate showdown, putting an end to my wife's duplicitous games. Fast forward 1 month, the day of the divorce hearing finally arrived. I picked up Nancy, and together we drove to the courthouse in Virginia. I had her take an early seat in the courtroom, intending to keep my wife unaware of Nancy's presence until it was her turn to testify. After all, if my wife could ambush me with more falsehoods, I felt justified in surprising her with the unvarnished truth. I also met with my attorney, who arrived 15 minutes after Nancy and me. My wife made her grand entrance 45 minutes later, accompanied by her extended family, a well-dressed man I assumed was her attorney, and a young girl who bore a striking resemblance to my wife. A few minutes later, the judge entered, and the hearing commenced. The opening statement by my wife's attorney left me in shock. He accused me of the very infidelity I had accused my wife of. He asserted that I had forced her to resign from her job, refused to assist her in finding new employment, and falsely accused her when I secured a better-paying job. To make matters worse, he argued that I intended to deny her alimony, leaving her destitute. The most startling allegation followed soon after. Allegedly, I was neglecting to provide any support for our supposed daughter who required financial assistance. He asked the court to compel me to make alimony payments to my wife after the divorce. I was utterly flabbergasted. My wife had never mentioned having a daughter, and her family had kept mum about it as well. We hadn't even planned on having children, let alone an 11 or 12-year-old girl. As I tried to wrap my head around these revelations, I recalled a peculiar reaction my wife had had to a question in high school. It then struck me, she must have dropped out to conceal a pregnancy. All these years, I believed we had no secrets, yet she had concealed this colossal one right in front of me. I had no time to dwell on this shocking revelation. The divorce hearing was already in progress, and I had to face it head-on. This revelation hit me hard, but I couldn't afford to be sentimental or weak anymore. I had to fight for my life at this moment. So it was our turn, and the battle began. My attorney cleared his throat before addressing the judge, saying, "Your Honor, they've misrepresented my client at every turn. There isn't a single instance of infidelity on his part that can be substantiated. The photographs and questions presented lack sufficient evidence to support such a claim. Moreover, we possess solid evidence that it's the opposing party who has been involved in rampant infidelity. Please refer to Exhibits A, B, and C, which showed the opposing party openly admitting to deceptive conduct for financial gain. These actions do not reflect the character of a trustworthy individual, especially one who distorts our actions and those of my client. Additionally, we contest the assertion that the opposing party requires financial support, as Exhibit D demonstrates she is currently employed and entirely capable of sustaining herself. Any contradictory claims are misleading. If opposing counsel disagrees, we challenge them to provide bank records to substantiate their case. These actions do not reflect the character of a trustworthy individual, especially one who distorts our actions and those of my client. Additionally, we contest the assertion that the opposing party requires financial support, as Exhibit D demonstrates she is currently employed and entirely capable of sustaining herself. Any contradictory claims are misleading. If opposing counsel disagrees, we challenge them to provide bank records to substantiate their case. My attorney took a pause before wrapping up, stating, "My client has been deceived and misled, and now he seeks to extricate himself from this web of falsehoods without suffering financial losses. We believe the court will see this as a reasonable request." The judge took a moment to deliberate, then proceeded to examine the evidence. The final exhibit, Exhibit D, had been meticulously gathered by my private investigator. It provided undeniable proof that my wife was still gainfully employed. As the courtroom viewed the evidence, her face visibly lost color. The photograph clearly depicted her working at a private couples club just a week prior, adorned in luxurious clothing and jewelry. Her attorney seemed bewildered while her family appeared astonished. I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph as her elaborate scheme unraveled before everyone's eyes. Throughout this entire ordeal, I had borne the brunt of the blows, and they just kept coming. Granted, I shared the responsibility when I granted her a second chance and chose the path of weakness. But now I had no remorse, and it was my turn to counterattack. Then came the ultimate bombshell when my attorney summoned Nancy to the witness stand. As Nancy stood up, my wife turned even paler, and I couldn't contain my satisfaction. Under my attorney's questioning, Nancy verified her identity, acknowledged her previous employment at the same club as Jennifer, my dear wife, and shared her observations about her. Nancy revealed how Jennifer flaunted her wealth and confessed to deceiving her husband while inebriated. When my attorney questioned Nancy about a photograph featuring both her and me, she clarified that she had approached me to disclose Jennifer's infidelity and had no reason to be afraid since she had resigned from her job at the club. She emphasized that the photograph didn't serve as evidence of any wrongdoing on my part, and to solidify this, she provided an audio recording of our conversation. As the recording played, my wife's expression soured further. She must have assumed I hadn't recorded anything, and without it, I might have fallen victim to her deception. However, the unfiltered truth was now exposed for everyone to hear, leaving her with no defense. After the recording was submitted as evidence, the judge turned to my wife and her attorney with a stern demeanor. Both parties have presented their cases and arguments concerning alimony. If there are any additional statements you wish to make, please do so before I deliver my verdict. I anticipated an emotional outburst from my wife, but she remained silent, her face buried in her hands. Even her family and her attorney regarded her with disappointment and disdain. The courtroom descended into silence before the judge addressed us once more. In regards to alimony, I find that the plaintiff lacks valid grounds to request financial support. The divorce petition is approved, and just like that, I was officially divorced and a free man. I walked out of that courtroom grinning like a kid who had just swiped the last piece of candy from the store. I never spoke to or saw Jennifer again. The moment had a bittersweet quality. Well, who am I kidding? It was mostly sweet. The only bitter aspect was the realization of how much time I had invested in a person like her. And as for my private investigator, he was my savior. He unearthed me from an avalanche of lies and deception, safeguarding more than just my finances. If there were a Nobel Prize for rescuing unsuspecting husbands, he'd be the recipient. This one's for him. Thank you for listening. I knew her intimate routine was somewhat predictable, so I expected it would be a while before they reached that point. With that in mind, I headed to the kitchen, which was on the opposite side of the house, ensuring they wouldn't hear any noise I made unless I deliberately wanted them to. After the rush of adrenaline, anger and thoughts swirling in my head, my stomach started to growl. I hadn't eaten because I had planned to have dinner and watch a movie with her. I glanced into the fridge, but the thought of food made me feel queasy. Old habits, however, die hard, so I checked the pantry, spotting a box of popcorn. I thought, why not? Popcorn seemed like a stomach-settling option with its buttery, salty goodness. I grabbed a bag, placed it in the microwave, and fortunately, she had one of those newer, quieter models. The only loud part was the latch on the door, so I carefully opened it to avoid making a noise. I cooked the popcorn, shook the bag, added some white cheddar seasoning, and shook it some more. Finally, I poured it into a bowl and continued to shake it a bit. I paused for a moment to listen for any sounds coming from her room, and sure enough, they hadn't stopped their activities, so they remained oblivious to my presence. About a minute later, I walked into the living room, grabbed a few bites of popcorn, and then I heard the awaited sound of the bed squeaking, indicating a shift in weight toward the center of the bed. It was clear someone was riding the other person, and then it hit me. Perfect, I thought. I know what to do. I mentioned earlier that her intimate routine was quite predictable. Well, I knew her physical cues well enough to time her noise. She wasn't exactly a screamer, but she could get loud. She also had insecurities, so she preferred to keep the lights off. When I glanced down the hall, I confirmed there was no light seeping through the bottom of the bedroom door, so I began timing it. I listened to the rhythm of her moans and the squeaks of the bed. I aimed to open the door in the middle of one of her moans so they wouldn't hear the latch. Peering in, I saw she was riding in vigorously, facing the headboard, which meant her back was to the door. I carefully backed out, checked the hall to see that the lights were still off, and then I opened the door once more, timed to coincide with one of her moans. I stepped inside quietly, with her obstructing his line of sight to the door. I settled into a desk chair she had near the door and started munching on my popcorn. It took a minute for the aroma of the popcorn to fill the room. She stopped, turned on the nightstand light, and faced me. They saw me sitting there, one foot crossed over my knee, bowl of popcorn in hand. Nodding my head, I said, "Don't stop because of me. I'm just here to see if she'll do anything different for you as she wasn't going to do for me." I took a few more bites of popcorn, watching the guy's eyes widen with each passing moment. Her face turned red with shame. Then, after finishing a bite of popcorn, I added, "Looks like she's doing the same thing she did to me last night. Quite entertaining from this angle." I said it while looking at her in a way that I knew would trigger her insecurity. I got up, left the bowl of popcorn in the chair, closed the bedroom door, gathered the few things of mine I had left at her place, and walked out. As I was getting my car into gear, he rushed out and started demanding to know who I was. I replied, well, I was her boyfriend, apparently. I didn't get the memo this evening that it was over. He began shaking like a frightened dog and said, "I didn't know she had a boyfriend." "Yeah, it seems she's not honest about things," I remarked while covering my mouth as if to hide a smirk. I drove off. A few hours later, she sent me texts ranging from apologies to blaming me, then apologizing again, claiming it was a mistake and that the other guy meant nothing. She later shifted the blame back to me, saying it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't expected to see you tonight. After that, I blocked her number.